Hello, welcome back to the Keto Summit. I am here with Marty Kendall. Marty, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Pleasure.
Marty is an engineer, and I've really been enjoying his website and then also the conversation at his Facebook group. And you probably don't think of this as yours anymore, right? Like, it's 3,500 people on this optimizing nutrition group on Facebook. And the discussion is phenomenal. It's really high level. You've got some really cool people, engineers, enthusiasts, doctors, all types of practitioners in on this group. So I'd highly recommend that people come over and join the conversation at Optimizing Nutrition. And then your blog is also phenomenal. You've been taking a real sort of engineer's viewpoint at the problem of optimizing nutrition is the best two words to describe it. And I've really been enjoying that content. So people should come over to optimizingnutrition.com and check this out. And yeah, so tell us a bit about yourself, Marty.
Yeah, family shot. I suppose my interest initially came from the fact that my wife Monica is a type 1 diabetic. Personally, I've got a family history of type 2 and struggle with obesity like a lot of other people in this world. And by day, I'm a civil engineer, not a doctor. I play with statistical analysis, multi-criteria analysis, as I was saying, to decide, pick a motorway alignment or which bike path to invest in, and which road to invest in, and had a bit of a play with systems trading in the stock market before the global financial crisis happened, and I took the money out and bought a house. So that's the headspace I come from. And
Did you take the money out before or after?
It sort of got really volatile and I went, stuff this, I'm out of here. So
that's good.
Didn't become fun anymore at that point.
Yeah, and I think you're one of the most interesting people. I would say that because I guess I'm like you, that have come at this with a specific problem that is your own, right? Nobody cares about this more than you do.
Definitely.
And when you've got some skills, some problem solving skills, that's a powerful double-edged sword there you can take advantage of.
Yeah, it's been a buzz to see people pick it up and go, hey, we appreciate that angle. And I've just taken the bull by the horns and kept riding and enjoyed the ride. So the next slide here goes through, I suppose, my day-to-day life with my wife, Monica. For the last 15 years, I've lived with the reality of up and down blood sugars, and the questioning that drives me and got me started and interested in this is, you see here that the insulin obviously brings blood sugar down, and what drives blood sugar up? Glucose. And how do we measure that? How do we understand that? And what can we do to normalize that so we get this sort of happy little stable blood glucose? Because as you know, the quality of life, when she goes low, she's all of a sudden having to throw some glucose tablets down or eat, and then dosed with more insulin, and mood and energy levels, and basically happy wife, happy life, and motivation. Personally, and for her to work out how to achieve normal blood glucose levels.
Right, and so obviously Monica's wearing a continuous blood glucose monitor, so that's
for the last 6 months or so. Yeah, she started doing that, but obviously for the last 15 years, it's blood sugar, and you go, what do we just eat, and what can I do with my knowledge and my understanding to achieve that normal blood glucose levels, which I think is fundamental to ketogenic diets, and that's where this leads into. Yeah, so as you mentioned, there's the Optimizing Nutrition group, which is really my university. Studied engineering at uni, but it's just mind-blowing that people like yourself and Tommy and a bunch of really smart people have joined this group that I started, and I've just hung on for the ride and learnt so much. And your podcast, another podcast, of the amount of learning you can do in such a short amount of time so easily is incredible. So I've just tried to take that knowledge and learning and apply it in my own life and document it in a blog. So,
well, thank you for the podcast blog. I'm the same, I'm just really taking credit for other people's hard work and research and knowledge. And then especially you can see there the episode that's playing in your little podcast player, that's one that we put a lot of effort into doing the research to create that episode. And really all I did is what I'm doing now, which is to show up and press the record button.
and yeah, curiosity. I love Ken Ford's Stay Curious, and that's fundamental. And just it's fun. I don't feel like it's real, but it's
right.
It's massive. So after I discovered the insulin index and nutrient density, I documented my stuff, my thoughts. I'm someone who writes. I know you say you hate writing, and but I'm someone who likes to write things down so I understand it and it makes sense on paper. And I had this 80-page manifesto that I called it, and I was just sitting on my computer and I went, it's frustrating, and I think this is exciting. I think this might be cool. And so in March 15, I started a blog, discovered WordPress, and it's just rolled on from there, and 120 articles, 730,000 views, which is completely mind-blowing.
That's amazing.
Taken over my life. And and it's really lovely to see. You went to a seminar yesterday and people say, I love your stuff, and it really changed my life. And you see it changing my wife's life and mine, and understanding how to eat well. And so many other people just say, it really affected me, and it just drives you to continue to experiment.
Right. You're helping people without ever speaking to them directly.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's a bit freaky to have to speak to you today, but it's great to have that opportunity. Yeah. So I prepared a bit of a slideshow. I'm going on the low carb cruise next week in Australia. Looking forward to it. So I prepared a few slides which give a bit of an overview of what I've been doing, what I've been thinking, and if you interject and harass and
okay,
and ask questions as you go through. So I'm going to touch on the insulin index and insulin load, talk about nutrient density, which I think is a really important adjunct to the ketogenic diet that I think is potentially lost at the moment, and then talk about energy flow and how we can manage that. And it's not all just about macronutrients. Mm-hmm. So optimizing nutrition. A mate of mine, Ted Naiman, probably one of the smartest people in insulin and diabetes and nutrient density, created this fun little graph that explains
pretty much everything. Oops.
People go, from extreme to extreme, from low carb to high to high carb to zero carb to high plant-based only. And I think potentially the challenge is finding the optimum balance between the two extremes all the time. And potentially optimum is swinging from feasting and fasting backwards and forwards, either side of that balance point. So with my quantitative background, that's what I've tried to do, to find the optimum point for the individual, because I don't think therapeutic ketosis is for everybody. I don't think plant-based is for everybody. But between those extremes, you can use quantitative measures to find the right balance point for the individual. So I think that's exciting, and that's something that needs. There's been a bit of a gap in the current thinking in the ketogenic world that I've been excited to be able to add to. I'm not a doctor, as I said, but I'm going to feature a few in the slideshow. I've featured a few doctors that have inspired me and influenced me. So this is David Sinclair, and I think some of his research into longevity is really, really, really exciting. So he talks about the slide is sort of borrowed and adapted from him. He talks about hormetic stress and how those different pathways lead to metabolic health and longevity. So basically, hormetic stress is whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So one pathway is low protein, which reduces insulin and increases mTOR. And a lot of people get excited about that, but it's interesting to see people like Tommy point out, hey, if you're a 70-year-old lady, being a really good yeast cell and minimizing your calories and your protein, but you fall over and break your hip and you're in hospital, right, you're basically screwed. So there's a balance point between high protein and low protein. And similarly, I think with the ketogenic diet, it's another way of minimizing glucose, increasing AMPK. Similarly with working out and exercise, increases AMPK. If you do them both together, you increase mitochondrial biogenesis and the efficiency of your cell, which is really exciting. And I think that the most interesting area is the area of fasting, and the way Sinclair talks about that increasing the recycling of NAD and activity of sirtuins, which is probably the most fascinating frontier at the moment in this whole area, and what you can do through fasting, but also nutrition and supplementation to drive that increase in NAD, which you guys are well aware of. So
yeah, we've been calling it NAD plus over here. Maybe you know, it's that you only see things written down and then you realize that you might have been saying them wrong for the last year.
You guys are the gurus in this. So, but yeah, as you keep saying, everything comes back to the mitochondria.
Yeah, it does. Look after those little guys.
Yeah, whether it's toxins or nutrients or fasting or whatever it is, what can you do to drive that? And yeah, the discussion that you guys have is fascinating to me. Yeah. So Mike Julian, the other co-conspirator in the Facebook group, keeps on bringing everything back to the race engine, and says that the body's like a race engine. You need to tune it and build a bigger motor, which is effectively metabolic health. Then you also need to feed it the optimal fuel, the optimal race fuel, which is nutrition. So finding that balance and looking at the right fuel and that can build your mitochondria is really a fascinating area. Any thoughts or questions? Or
No, carry on.
Carry on. Okay. Yeah. So 3 components of my optimizing nutrition system that I've developed: insulin load, nutrient density, and energy density. So basically, we can fine tune our system and nutrient system for different people. So I'll touch on insulin load. A while ago, about 18 months ago, I was listening to some lectures by Jason Fung, who's been on the podcast and has been a big influence to me and really assisted in getting the blog out there and sharing what I've done in the area of the insulin index and insulin load. So he was talking in his Ideology of Obesity series about the food insulin index and how some people following an Atkins approach can overdo the protein and end up, generating too much insulin, which then leaves them struggling to lose weight. My ears pricked up and I thought, something different I haven't quite heard before. The first time I heard the term glucogenic protein was on your podcast, where you mentioned that protein could be glucogenic, and so I went digging and found a paper by Jenny Brand Miller, who also developed the glycemic index about 20 years ago, and everybody knows about the glycemic index, which is the way that the carbohydrates raise your glucose, but that depends on your individual insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. So it really, for somebody who's metabolically healthy and insulin sensitive, glucose doesn't rise much, but for someone who's metabolically stuffed and really in trouble, it will rise a lot. So it depends from person to person. But I think where the food insulin index gets really exciting is what they've done is measured the area under the curve of different foods of insulin response. So they feed different people a certain amount of food, 1,000 kilojoules of food, and measure the area under the curve of the insulin response. So they've went digging initially that there's about 47 foods, and it's quite confusing, but I found a thesis by Kirstine Bell that was released late 2014 that's got 147 different foods documented in it. I went, this is really, really fascinating. So just downloaded the data out of the paper and dropped it into a spreadsheet. And so this is a plot of carbohydrate versus insulin response to different foods. And basically the mindset is carbs raise insulin and everything else is great. Fat, protein is it's not a concern, but as you look in more detail, you see, hey, butter, bacon, olive oil down here are low insulin response, which you'd expect. Jelly beans have got a high insulin response. Glucose is at 100% here. But then you go, wait out, you've got protein over here, which is actually causing a fairly high insulin response, which was a bit confusing and startling initially. All bran and coleslaw and porridge and those sort of foods that have a lot of fibre have a low insulin response. High fructose raisins have a low insulin response, or lower than expected. And so I did some associational analysis and looked at how we could get the best correlation. So what I found is that if you assume that protein has about half the insulin response of carbohydrate, fiber has no insulin response, and fructose has about a quarter of the insulin response, you get a much better correlation, which you see here, that once you factor in the effect of fiber, which is net carbohydrates, and protein, you actually get a much better correlation overall, a more straight line graph demonstrating insulin response to food. So I think that's really exciting, and although they'd done a lot of analysis in the Food Insulin Index data, they hadn't quite presented it that simply, and I thought this is really interesting, and particularly for the type 1 diabetes community and my wife, and so I think that's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. So have you been using this to shape your wife's diet then? When you get her into that unicorn zone on the continuous glucose monitor, you're thinking about this chart when you're choosing what she eats, or when what she eats.
That's effectively it. So we can use the proportion of insulinogenic calories using this sort of formula here to rank your foods to demonstrate, but based on their insulin response. So you can say, well, olive oil and butter have basically zero insulin response, and glucose has a really high insulin response. So I think it's really where it's really, really exciting is when you look at therapeutic ketosis and how we can actually actively manage the diet for people with cancer, epilepsy, dementia, and etc. that are trying to minimize the insulin demand of their food. So the second component of the system, looking at it, is not just insulin load, but nutrient density. As I looked more and more at the foods that are the lowest in insulin load and lowest insulinogenic calories, you've got butter and olive oil and peanut butter and cream, which are fantastically yummy foods, but the problem is that they don't contain potentially a lot of vitamins and minerals and amino acids that are also critical to driving health, particularly metabolic health. So interesting to see Sarah Ballantyne did a really thorough takedown of the ketogenic diet and looked at all the issues that can happen. But then there's a really good review by Adam Nally and Jimmy Moore where they looked at in detail of all the studies and found that really what the problem was, but all these kids that are being fed really high fat diets for epilepsy and the like were eating basically keto junk food out of a can that ended up being low nutritional density. So they're really nutrient deficiency issues rather than just actually being relating to the ketogenic diet. So it's not really macros that are the problem, but the nutrient density. So potentially, I think is nutrient density more important than macros? A lot of people talk about. I think we've figured out finally that driving down blood sugar with more insulin is a dumb idea because it's really insulin resistance that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But the question then is what causes insulin resistance, and I think you need to look another step back further. And as you keep talking about, it's your metabolic health, it's your mitochondrial function, it's your inability of your mitochondria to actually take all the energy that you're throwing at it because they're just not able to function at optimal capacity. So if we think in terms of insulin resistance being a mitochondrial function deficiency problem, then the question is what do we do to drive your mitochondrial function more effectively through nutrition? So a few more influences and quotes from Dr. Paul Jaminet. He says a nourishing, balanced diet that provides all the required nutrients in the right proportions is the key to eliminating hunger and minimizing appetite at minimal caloric intake. So what this really means is that if you're eating junk food and processed grains and sodas, your body's going to go, well, I didn't get enough nutrition from that. I'm going to need to keep on searching out for more and more food to get the nutrients it needs to operate effectively and efficiently and have lots of energy. So, and to do that, you end up taking a whole lot of extra energy that you didn't really need if you could achieve that with a smaller energy or caloric intake.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Terry Wiles, who's addressed her own mitochondrial issues with MS, says to produce ATP efficiently, the mitochondria need particular things: glucose or ketone bodies from fat, and oxygen are primary, which is a lot of the time what we focus on. That's the macros. We look at the balance between glucose and ketones. But she goes on and says your mitochondria can limp along producing a few ATP on only these three things. But to really do the job right and produce the most ATP, your mitochondria also need thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acid, minerals such as sulfur, zinc, magnesium, iron, and manganese, and antioxidants. Mitochondria also need plenty of carnitine, alpha-lipoic acid, creatine, and coenzyme Q for peak efficiency. So really what we're looking at is not just macros, but we also need to drive the mitochondria to operate at peak efficiency to maximize our insulin sensitivity and energy levels. And for people like you, that's really what it's all about, to go faster on the bike and to think more clearly and to...
Yeah, I mean, I think making ATP is the name of the game, regardless of what your goals are, right? I don't care whether you're sat at a desk trying to write a novel or, you know, there's an Ironman triathlon going on in town here.
Totally.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like, everybody's trying to produce as much ATP as possible.
And the thing I value the most is being able to think clearly and create. And if your brain is sluggish and dead, it just doesn't, it's not fun. And
it's a waste of life is what that is.
Yeah, you're depressed and you're tired and just much more fun when you're feeling great. So that's the key to it. So looking at nutrient density, I went digging. Joel Furman's done some fascinating work looking at vitamins and minerals and in terms of per calorie, also threw in a bunch of other interesting factors. And more recently, Matt Lalonde does a fantastic 2012 AHS presentation where he considered vitamins, minerals, aminos, and essential fatty acids in terms of per weight, and came up with a fairly paleo sort of focused version of nutrient density, which, both of which really interested me and stimulated me. So I thought, hey, as well as the 147 foods in the food insulin index, you can download the USDA food database with 7,000 foods, which has got all the micronutrients, macronutrients, and all the details, and do it for myself. And I thought, maybe if I can combine the two, build a bigger spreadsheet to combine both, and optimize for myself, my wife, and it's just intellectual curiosity, and came up with some interesting stuff. So what you see here in this graph is all the micronutrients, essential micronutrients, vitamins, minerals.
The ones that we know so far.
Yes, exactly. And I suppose that's a really great point, is that if you try to get these all in pills from iHerb or whatever, the problem is you're only getting the ones so far that are isolated. If you're eating real foods,
right, then you're automatically getting the ones you don't know about yet.
You get a much better chance of getting all the ones that the other ones we haven't quantified yet.
Mm-hmm.
But, so what you can see here is the red bars are the amount of micronutrients versus the daily recommended intake per 2,000 calories. Both of those are flawed, but they're both an interesting reference point. So the red bars, you get a good chunk of protein. Some of the vitamins are lacking, but if you take the top 1,000 foods, so the 7,000 foods,
that is interesting. I get it now.
Yeah, so that's the yellow bars, and you get a much higher nutrient density if you just be more selective based on your quantification of nutrient density. But I mean, what you find here is these are the amino acids up this end here, and you really max out your aminos if you just look in terms of nutrient density, and that's what Lalonde ended up doing. And his version of nutrient density is really protein heavy, and you end up with a 40-50% protein diet, just because these high protein foods are really nutrient dense at the same time. So it's what do you do with it? Sort of started sharing it.
Why should some of the max nutrient density foods be lower? You've got some yellow bars that are smaller than the red bars there.
Yeah. So I ended up arguing with Ray Cronise. He's a really fascinating, intelligent guy, and obviously a big fan of his good mates with Joel Furman. And he pointed out that what you're really aiming for is calorie restriction without malnutrition in his worldview. So you're not trying to maximize all your nutrients, but you're trying to maximize the ones that are harder to get. So what I did, basically turned off the ones in the system that were easy to obtain. So then we're able to better emphasize iron, vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin K, and those ones that are harder to get. So we design a system that is fine-tuned for the vitamins that are the nutrients that are harder to get in that system. Right. So I think that's really exciting, and then we can combine that with our food insulin index and insulin load concept to say, well, how do we maximize nutrients while also manage the insulin loads? So, yeah.
Right. One thing I'm thinking about when I look at this, though, is that it's not individualized, right? So for someone that spends his life looking at organic acids tests that show of these individual nutrients, and we can't test for all of them, but for example, say vitamin B12, we have methylmalonic acid, which is a very good indicator of vitamin B12 deficiency.
Yep.
And of course, my methylmalonic might be different from Ray Cronice's methylmalonic, right?
Sure.
If he's eating an all plant foods diet, then there aren't any plant food sources of B12. So he's much more likely to be deficient. So I think this is the reason why the studies of multivitamins always come out crap, right? You give them, a bunch of people were deficient in some things, but not in others. And then, if you already had iron overload, then taking a multivitamin with iron in it is probably going to end in a worse outcome. So I think it needs to be individualized.
Yeah, and that's where the organic acids test can then fine tune it even further. But I've designed it for, as you'll see later, for therapeutic ketosis, diabetes, weight loss, and just maximizing nutrient density. But then you could potentially dig even further and refine those optimum foods for different people based on their organic acid test output.
Right. Yeah, but it certainly makes sense to start with a reasonable default. That's what this is, a reasonable default.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's exciting territory that you can then personalize your nutrition and say, well, these are the optimum foods for you. Mm-hmm. So what this gives is a list of, the optimum foods for different approaches. You can then analyze the nutrient density of different food groups, compared to all foods, so vegetables, fruits, cereals and grains don't do fantastically. Fish does really, really well in terms of the protein, but then the vitamins and minerals are not fantastic. So what these orange bars are is the average minus the standard deviation of the nutrients. So, for example, the fish, you've got high protein, but you don't have all the vitamins and minerals represented. So, and I suppose the warning here is that if you're just looking at the most ketogenic diet foods, which you can isolate using the formulas we talked about before, you end up with fats and oils that aren't necessarily going to be really nutrient dense. So you need to find that right balance point between nutrient density and your insulin load. And the best approach just seems to be to eat the most nutrient dense food across all the food groups. And then I suppose the next step in the system is energy density, moving on from insulin load, nutrient density. Gardner's done some fascinating work in Harvard looking at the effect of looking at different groups of people, how they do on low carb and low fat diets based on the insulin resistance status. And what he found was that people who are the most insulin resistant do really well on a low carb diet, while the people who are actually insulin sensitive just do well by reducing their fat load of their diet. There's a satiety index which Jenny Brand-Miller and University of Sydney also developed about 20 years ago that looks at the things that influence satiety. I think this is particularly useful for people who are insulin sensitive. It's a little bit more complex for people who are insulin resistant. But as you can see here, chips, cookies, Mars bar, donut, cakes that have low protein, low fiber, high energy density. Don't give you a lot of satiety, but oranges, fish, steak, potatoes always do fantastically. Are quite satiating per calorie. So think of it in terms of butter versus celery. It's going to be harder to get through your 2,000 calories a day of celery versus
Right.
butter. So if you're insulin sensitive, then that's also another characteristic. So we can then combine it based on whether your situation is therapeutic ketosis, managing diabetes, you're insulin sensitive, but you're now looking for weight loss, or you just want to have maximum nutrient density, or you're a bodybuilder trying to bulk up. So then using a multi-criteria analysis type process, you can then combine those different parameters. So someone looking for therapeutic ketosis, which maybe a lot of people listen to these Keto Summit sessions, is looking to bottom out their insulin load while getting as much nutrient density as they can. Someone on low carb is looking for a lower insulin load while maximizing nutrient density. Nutrient dense is just all that nutrient density. Weight loss is going to want to minimize energy density while also being nutrient dense. The bodybuilder trying to bulk actually wants to maximize their insulin while also being nutrient dense. And then we can also use the system to say these are the things we should avoid. These are the foods we can avoid. And I think that's the most interesting thing, that this quantitatively demonstrates that rather than just relying on religious belief that sodas and processed grains and sugars are bad for you, that this system demonstrates quantitatively that those are the foods you should be avoiding. So it's potentially quite exciting. And then this graphic really summarizes it all. So what I've done is looked at the top foods based on each approach for therapeutic ketosis, diabetes, weight loss, nutrient density, and looked at the macros for each approach. So a therapeutic ketosis diet, those top 1,000 foods are going to be quite high fat and lower in protein to keep your insulin load down. But if you're trying to find the right balance for you between insulin load and nutrient density, then as your metabolic health increases and you've got a better capacity to deal with glucose, your protein is going to increase as you increase the nutrient density, and your non-fiber carbohydrates are also going to increase with green veggies and the like, and maybe even for full-on nutrient density, you might be able to tolerate some oats and porridge or whatever, but your sugar and those sort of things are going to be right out because they're low nutrient density, high insulin load foods. So I think this is an exciting concept that you can tailor based on nutrient density and insulin load for your particular situation. As you said, individualized for a particular person. And then if you want to dig down even further, you could say, well, you've got too much iron, you've got iron overload, or whatever the parameter is, you can focus on that.
Right.
Yeah. So Rob Wolf is saying a lot lately in a lot of podcasts, you need to eat to maintain the blood glucose levels of a metabolically healthy person. I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. That you want to maximize nutrient density while also balancing your blood sugars and maintaining your blood sugar. So as I mentioned before, a lot of people are all in for therapeutic ketosis when maybe they don't need that therapeutic ketosis approach, when they maybe just need a low carb approach, or maybe they're actually insulin sensitive and they just need to drop out the fat. So thinking in terms of nutrient density, insulin load, and then fine tuning with your actual blood sugars is I think where it's at. So this chart here shows the nutrient density, the different approaches for comparison. So if you want to be maximizing your nutrient density, but if you need to tailor it for your particular situation, people with cancer, epilepsy, dementia, need that therapeutic ketosis approach for as long as it takes to recover, and perhaps they can improve their metabolic health over time. So a while ago, everybody bought the Jimmy Moore book, and keto clarity, and I got the ketone strips and started testing madly. And, you know, everybody, the money tests for blood sugars in our family. So, but eventually the strips get expensive. So I thought maybe there's a relationship between ketones and glucose that we can understand without having to test ketones all the time. You know, what is that relationship between ketones? So I was able to source about 1,200 different data points from different people through Facebook and different communities to plot ketones versus glucose. So there's obviously some relationship whereby ketones drop, blood sugar drops and your ketones increase as you can't obtain food. Your body releases ketones and you're happy and you're chilled and you don't need food. But if you look at that on a per person basis, that relationship between ketones and glucose is different, and that was quite puzzling. But if you look at the individuals and look at who those people are, you can see potentially that gradient between glucose and ketones and where it intercepts when there's no ketones over here is a really telling factor of the individual metabolic health. So you can actually characterize that into someone who's got type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, mild insulin resistance, someone who's really metabolically healthy, and somebody who has hyperinsulinemia, just got too much insulin circulating, and their blood sugars are repressed and their ketone bodies are repressed. So you can see someone with type 2 diabetes, they've got really high blood sugars. And if they stop eating carbs, the blood sugar is going to drop. The ketones don't come out, and they feel very crappy, and they need to eat again. So I think this really helps me understand how appetite is influenced by your insulin sensitivity. So this person here who has type 2 diabetes will really benefit by eating a higher fat diet, that they can have some energy while their blood sugars drop and their insulin sensitivity improves. And as Jason Fung talks about, you know, the best way to improve your insulin sensitivity is just stop throwing insulin at it. Minimize your insulin dose, minimize the insulin load of your food, and you can do that through this sort of a system. And progressively,
levels of ketones achieved? Is this through fasting or through a ketogenic diet?
These are 1,200 data points from about 30 different people who are following a ketogenic diet,
right?
Based on fasting and fed state. So, yeah. So there seems to be a relationship there, regardless, depending on your insulin sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the aim is to try and get to that metabolically healthy point where you've got a flatline blood sugar. So I took those data points and plotted them in terms of ketones plus glucose. So I think one of my challenges with the current ketogenic diet approach, I think a lot of people think if they've got high ketones, they're metabolically healthy. So if they keep on achieving, if you fast, your ketones are going to rise, and you feel really great because then you're able to go out and hunt for food and get that woolly mammoth for the family. But a lot of people are trying to achieve that fasted ketone levels in a fed state by eating more and more fat and exogenous ketones, and loading up and up more and more. And when I looked at this more and you plot it this way, I think potentially what's going to happen is that the body's going to go, I've got a massive amount of energy floating around my system. I need to pull it out by excreting some insulin to remove that excess energy, whether it be ketones or glucose, to body fat. And Tommy Wood talks about, maintaining a low energy state, and that's what happens at this end. And I think all the good things of ketosis potentially happen in this fasted end, where you've got a lower energy load in your body, and you've got mitochondrial biogenesis, autophagy, you increase your NAD plus, your NAD, and the sirtuins start acting, and actually your endogenous ketones kick in.
This may not just be a game then to get the highest level of blood ketones, which is quite an easy one to fall into, right?
Yeah, so people are jamming exogenous ketones and MCT oil and then going, I'm getting high ketones, but I'm putting on weight. Why is this? I was told that if I just get high ketones, I'd lose weight. So
yeah. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
tell it's not right. Like intuitively, I can tell that this area on the right hand side is not right because it doesn't feel good. So, I did a bike race today, and I jammed down a bunch of exogenous ketones right before that bike race, and I'm kind of there, sort of feeling kind of jittery, like I've had too much coffee, waiting for the race to start, right? And I'm having to keep moving, and it's not a good feeling. It's like
You're burning up all that energy.
yeah, exactly. Full of energy, and your brain is like, okay, let's go, let's expend some of this energy, and it doesn't want it. It doesn't want like an excess of energy just like floating around in flux.
Yeah, I think maybe if you're racing the Tour de France or you've got some performance goal you're going for, then maybe forcing the body into this state is a really optimal point. But for general health and wellness on a day-to-day basis, there are some real risks of driving high ketones. And I suppose the other thing I've been noticing is, you talk to people like Lewis and other people that are actually active and metabolically healthy. They don't see these blood ketones. They're actually burning their blood ketones. And I think if they blew into a ketonics, they'd get really high acetone because they're actually burning the ketones. So I think that's a learning for me at the moment is, really high ketones. I got some fantastic ketones. I did a week fast and I was getting obscenely high ketones, but in a fed state on a day-to-day basis, you're not going to get massive blood ketones, but you might, if you're metabolically healthy and burning your fat, which is fundamental to pretty much everything, you might get really high ketonics acetone levels. Yeah. So Raymond Edmonds, who you know from the Facebook group, is
he's a pretty amazing guy. It's quite hard to keep up with him.
Yeah, the whole group is hard to keep up with him. It blows my mind on a daily basis. I open up Facebook and go, wow, how do I read all these studies that have been posted to keep up with what everybody's talking about? But he summarizes as complex as everything else. He talks in terms of fast well, feed well, and I think it can all be summarized fairly well. That simply that if we want to feed on nutrient-dense foods that don't raise our blood sugars too much, and then when we fast, we want to bring our blood sugar down, our energy levels down, maybe our ketones will rise to compensate. But we want to come into this point at this bottom end where we maximize autophagy and increase NAD plus, and these sirtuins kick in and you get that regeneration, and that's the part of ketosis, the deprivation of carbs and protein and insulinogenic foods that actually drives metabolic health. So that's a really fundamental concept for me. And one blog post that's been quite popular is using your glucose meter as a fuel gauge, and that's something I've practiced myself. And do I feel hungry? I can measure my blood glucose, and am I down here or am I up here? Is it time to eat? You can actually fine tune that, and if you're having 3 major meals and lots of snacks all the time, you're never really going to enable your body to get down here. It's that pendulum swing of feed well, fast well, feed well, fast well, that you can achieve optimal ketosis, optimal health and longevity. It's really exciting. Yeah. So we're talking about ketone levels and this is my experience 18 months ago when I started dabbling in with the ketosis concept. This was my glucose versus ketone levels, fairly high glucose and not massive ketones. So there I was, trying to load up on butter and olive oil and MCT and bulletproof coffees, trying to get higher ketones, but it was really my insulin resistance that was stopping me from increasing. And a couple of weeks ago, after I wrote a post on exogenous ketones, I thought, hey, I can prove that you don't need the exogenous ketones to drive ketone levels up, and did a 7-day fast and got some fantastic level ketones and kept my blood sugars quite low. And obviously I think it's exciting how you can change your metabolic health through all the things you guys talk about, not just macros, but macros is part of it, to improve your ketone levels. So I suppose in summary, the idea is to maximize nutrient density so you can maximize your mitochondrial function, which is sort of the upstream factor, I think, in insulin resistance, and then moderate your insulin load for your current metabolic capacity to normalize blood glucose. And then, as you guys talk a lot about, you can maximize your lean muscle mass, do fasted and high intensity, the maffetone style low intensity exercise, and intermittent fasting to improve your metabolic health and insulin resistance. So that then enables you to produce your own endogenous ketones, and which is an exciting place that will maximize your metabolic health and long-term longevity. So that's it.
Awesome. I've just got one question.
Yeah, mate.
That is, do you want to write some software? It seems like you've got this pretty well nailed, and we just need to automate this process for people, right? So you come in and you say, is my goal therapeutic ketosis? Is it weight loss? Is it endurance performance? Is it something else? And then you've got the database plus all this other data that you can use to construct a diet of maximally nutrient dense foods.
Yep. Yeah, and you can say, well, these are the optimum foods for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you got any plans like that? Is this just going to stay a hobby for you?
Oh, mate, it's taken over my life, but I've still got a day job that pays the bills. So the iHerb adverts that have earned me $12, I'm going to pay for this kid's school fees.
Yeah. No, I think we really need to do that. I think it's, you can tell that this is a difficult problem, else that 4-to-1 ketogenic diet in a can wouldn't exist, right? Some nutritionist somewhere said, you know what, this is too hard. Can you just put this in a can so that I can just give this product to this child and just know that they're going to be eating the right diet? So I don't doubt that it's a difficult problem, but it doesn't seem insurmountable to me.
Definitely. No. And I think the data is out there. And we've got the theory to pull it together into an actionable app or a software program or something.
Right.
And then, as you say, you could throw in your organic acid output.
Yeah, just overlay the more complex stuff, or just start with the basics. And I think you're in a unique position to connect people, right? So there's all these people that are doing all this experimentation. They're using things like the Ketonix breath meter to measure ketones in breath very frequently. And so they have all this data, but where's it all going? That's what I want to know. Like, if it just sits on a hard drive somewhere, it's of no use to anyone. We're like, we need to create a way to share this data so that you can do more experiments like this and learn more from people's experience.
Every time I meet someone who's tracking and logging, there's a lot of people out there. Like, I met someone yesterday, a couple yesterday at a conference, who are gathering massive amounts of data and had massive success. And, they said, I'll email you my spreadsheets, and I can just conglomerate more and more data. That it's an exciting time that with these Facebook groups and online communities, we can be well in front of the medical research communities or even the drug companies in natural therapies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic, Marty. Thank you very much.
It's been great. Good to meet you, Chris.
Yeah, no,
Thanks
absolutely.
for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And of course, optimizingnutrition.com is the website if you'd like to go and read more about Marty's work. And then the Facebook group is the same name, right?
Yep.
Optimizing Nutrition on Facebook. So I will, of course, link to those two things in the webpage that hosts this video. And thanks again, Marty. It's really nice to meet you and to get to know you a bit better.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Cheers. See ya.